We are here today with Talibri Town Crier, Episode 1. We actually are done with our interviews of the devs for a little bit, and we're on to a rather long episode today about the entirety of gathering and crafting. Long, but not 100% fulfilling. We're going to have some later episodes that actually include some details on um, some more advanced topics on like end product crafting, maybe some supply chains. None of that today, but we're going to at least tell you stuff that you may not be paying attention to if you're only paying attention to one profession.
Yeah, that's really one of my biggest shortfalls, I think, is I'm a forester by trade. I keep tabs on some of the gathering type news, but in general, if it's not in forestry, I'm not paying attention. So I think a lot of people can relate, and hopefully this will be a benefit to those listening or watching, just so they can get a greater sense of what's going on just outside their profession, and maybe if they're looking to decide on a profession to go with, this might give them a little bit of insight to that as well.
Yeah. And I'm a cook by trade. I specifically watch everything that the combatants need, and whatever they need, I actually pay attention to a lot of that as well. So I'll be seeing about answering as many questions as possible. I'm Devon.
And I'm Stretch.
All right, and let's get the show on the road.
All right. So we have a general introduction of who we are and what we do. Like I said, I'm from the crafting variety or the gathering variety, and Devon's from the crafting variety. Um,
Hmm.
so I guess let's start with what are the different professions within gathering and crafting?
Starting with gathering, we actually have four of them right now. There may actually be some later on, but these four actually encompass a lot of what you find in RPGs or games like most PBBGs. You're going to have botany, which is going to be feeding into the fibers for your tailoring, um, your plants for your alchemy, the herbs for cooking. It's actually one of the most diverse gathering skills there is. Fishing specifically goes to cooking. I'm not sure if it's going to be evolved into anything later on, but currently it's just for fishing, for cooking. Uh, Forestry currently is very lucrative because it's going into not only cooking but also plank making, which is going to be later on going into player housing because of all the planks necessary for that, and mining. There's a few uses for mining right now, but mostly it's going to be going into smithing. There's some hints towards a future affinity or combat class, as you might call it, called the Ace Master, who's actually going to be using some ore. Very odd, but very interesting. Kind of hopeful to see what that's like.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things you mentioned is the diversity within botany. That was actually a surprise to me. Um, going through forestry, there's only like 11 types of logs. In mining, there's 12 types of ores. But once you get into fishing, there's 21 different types of fish. And botany, there's 42 different gathering items. So when I found that out, it kind of blew my mind a little bit because how do you become a master in all of those things, or do you just camp on one? But I did notice going through the leaderboard today, you have a lot lower average mastery for each one of the botany items. But it does give you a chance if there's really something you want to hone in on, or if there's something that is lucrative, if you raise up your mastery in it, you could really kind of control the market for that one
Mhm.
particular item.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of room for that. Moving into the future, there's definitely going to be a lot of consumables, a lot of equipment, and a lot of different stats to pay attention to that people might have in high demand at any one point in the game. And the more players there are in Talibri over time, the more demand there's going to be of pretty much everything along there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, gatherers definitely kind of control the ebb and flow of the markets because without the gathering, there's nothing else really exists. Um,
Yeah.
so with that in mind, there will always be a steady income, but there might be so much competition for that income that prices generally remain low. Output's pretty high because as far as I know, um, really the biggest advantage that gatherers have is as they level up their mastery, um, as they get equipment, as they get tools, n- there's no benefit to reducing the amount of input, um, crafters would want. It's all about output, increasing output. So someone like me who can feed 4 cooks, um, when we started out, that was I could really handle 1 cook, and so they're
Hmm.
consuming fewer fish or consuming fewer logs. I'm outputting more logs. So as you go through and level up your mastery, it's one of the things to consider because you might not need as many gatherers. Um,
Yeah. The counterbalance for that, of course, is going to be trying to actually get higher tier of materials, which slows you down. But then the counterbalance of that is that crafters are going to have a lower chance of using that item successfully because it raises the difficulty of the crafting that they do with it.
yeah,
There are going to be some systems that change in the future, specifically for cooking in that regard, but we'll get into that in probably a later episode when that actually happens.
sure. So while we're on the topic of crafting, why don't we get into what those professions are?
Yeah. So I already mentioned kind of what actually feeds into this. You're going to have alchemy, which is handling pretty much all consumables right now. There might be more that gets added to it in the future, but right now, potions are big. I wouldn't say they're really big in the meta right now. There's some use for them in replacement of seared salmon for pure healing. And there's a lot of speculation as for what the higher level potions are going to be potentially for if there is actually currently or if there will be soon gathering and crafting experience bonus potions. Nothing confirmed yet, but we believe that that's something that is in the game or will be. They're just not telling us anything about it yet. Blacksmithing, a pretty roundabout craft. It takes a lot of ore. Inside of blacksmithing is actually the creation of bars, which is for every single metal type or ore type, and those bars can actually be turned into a lot of different things, usually all components, which are then combined to make the equipment that you wear. Um, this is also true of tailoring, which gets the fibers from botanists, and that makes cloth. And cloth is able to turn into fabrics and bindings. And bindings is basically what you need for putting together any suit of armor. And then fabric is used for making light armor, where plates from blacksmithing is used for heavy armor. Two very conflicting professions in which you can actually be in either one and actually be in interesting competition depending on what the things do. Cooking, that's actually my home. There is pretty much a recipe for about 80% of the fish out there currently. They're working on adding more recipes over time to make a better stepping stone for every single level gap. Uh, and that's currently the meta right now for what you're going to be consuming to do combat. There's seared salmon, which is the main healing item, and a lot of the other fish that you cook will specifically use herbs and logs for the fire. And on top of just a lower healing amount than seared salmon, will include a buff for this below one combat. But it'll be soon revamped to last like a certain amount of ticks, like 5, and that buff is usually along the lines of a resistance buff or a proc that will make you deal an additional X amount of damage with higher tiers, including higher resistance values or damage procs. Interesting. In the future, we hear that it's going to actually be where food can only be eaten out of combat or just before it, and the potions I mentioned earlier from alchemy will be used inside of combat but with a cooldown. So, interesting metric that's going to completely change the market for those two
Yeah,
if you want to look
absolutely.
forward. Last one is actually woodworking, which is going to be super important right now and super important moving forward as well. Really high in demand. Pretty much the only thing that feeds into them right now is going to be forestry, and they're going to be using a lot of logs to make a lot of planks. That's their main resource that they use right now. But they also have some other things that they work on, like arrows, specifically arrow shafts, and then they can receive arrowheads from blacksmiths, and they'll be able to make full arrows out of pretty much every single metal there is in the game. That hasn't been explored a lot. There are a few people that are playing Rangers right now. We'll get more into that with the combat episode, but yeah, that hasn't really been fully explored to the end because there's not a lot of demand for arrows because they started the game off as an extremely rare, expensive thing to make because the amount of supply that actually needed to make it. But that's slowly changing and getting better. There's actually technically some more crafts in the game. One of them is enchanting, which is only currently for one item in the game, and that's going to be for the demonic key, which is made from demonic key fragments gained from combat. It's a one-off item because it's actually used to gain access to a combat zone. You're pretty much only going to be seeing that if you do combat. It's not really rare. It just takes some time, or you can just buy it on the market from other combatants for quite a lot of leol. And aside from that, we've mentioned construction, which is going to actually be uh, a really big contributor to the future market of the game. It's going to be the first leol sink. It's not in the game right now, but it will be soon. And the important thing with that is if you want a lot of details on that, we actually released a video last week interviewing Hootie on all the details of that. So you can actually go and back watch that episode one episode back, and that's pretty much everything on there.
This is where I say a link to the video, both right here and in the description below.
Yeah.
So one of the things actually I wanted to ask is now there's some crafting operations you can do that seem to be independent of profession, right? That would be like combining like a tool head and handle. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a couple of different steps to crafting, and it's usually split up into two different categories. The one that you're talking about is component crafting, and what is the step just before that is what's called what I call intermediate crafting, but could also be called refined material crafting. So that's going to be when you turn ore into bars. The bars is like an intermittent material towards getting an end product. You can actually consider it your own class of crafter, because I would actually rather call someone a smelter than an actual blacksmith when all they're doing is turning ore into bars.
Mm-hmm.
You can make an entire profession off just doing that, because most likely on the market, the demand is going to actually make it so you can buy ore off the market, smelt it, and then make a profit because someone's buying your time. And time is the biggest resource in this entire game. Some details on the refined material specifically. They're used by other crafters. So usually, unless you want to expand into multiple masteries, you're probably not going to be making use of them yourself. And extremely highly valuable. If a end product crafter is completely denied from these, it's going to cost them either a lot more money in making connections, or they're going to have to waste a lot of time and not getting full mastery gain to be able to acquire them themselves. When it gets to end product crafting, that's when things get kind of interesting because while everything up to this point has just been a material that costs stuff and then you get an end product, now you actually turned those products into something that you actually wear or use. This is going to be including the blades, the hilts, the handles, the tool heads, fabric, which is combined with a binding to make you your light armor or your crafting or gathering gear. Pretty much anything you see on your inventory that you're wearing is all end product. And these are going to be the things that actually have statistics on them. While everything else is just something that floats in your inventory and is stacked up to hundreds of thousands, these are going to be things that show up individually in your inventory that you're going to be able to equip actually through your profile, not just the inventory. And these include a lot of RNG as well. People that are going to be making end products are going to have to deal with a lot of patience because you're going to have to make about 500 of the same item to hope that maybe 20 of those are actually in the range that you're looking for, which can be quite frustrating at times. I've actually been talking with a lot of people that have to deal with that, and that's actually entirely on purpose. You're going to have to get your mastery up over time on a specific craft in that sub-mastery. You may be making a specific pick, but you're going to need to be able to get your iron pick mastery up, where the more iron picks you make, the higher your iron mastery is under making picks. And for example, the higher mastery you get, the better your minimum will be on that RNG. The maximum is entirely determined by your pick head mastery. So that's kind of how you balance that over time. And there's actually even more RNG that goes into this, as if that wasn't enough. You can actually make an end product, and then you can say, this isn't good enough, I want to just trash it. But you're not actually throwing it away, you actually break it up into what's called finishing material. And that's where things get sometimes better, sometimes worse. You can actually do what's called finishing on an end product, and it'll roll on an RNG table of plus or minus 15% to the statistics on that item. And this is when you actually turn that 500 that you made, and then that smaller group of 20, and then hope that 50% of those are actually better than what your normal stat range is. So out of 500, you usually only get 10 that are actually going to be completely marketable, and some that are once again turned into almost trash.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, if you're actually going to be making stuff, you're going to be consuming a lot of materials, but realize that the price you're going to be able to sell that stuff for on the very high end is going to be worth a lot.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um, Pretty much the one bonus, if you actually want to be an end product crafter, like the one cherry on top of the entire thing is going to be you actually get to have your crafted by tag. Uh, well, maybe. When you make that and you combine all the items together, you get to actually put the crafted tag on. But if you're handed the components or buy the components there and combine them yourself, you get that crafted by tag.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting system.
Now, going back a little bit, you'd talked about the components of RNG. Now, how exactly does mastery fit in with gathering versus crafting, and then how does the RNG interact with your mastery when you're actually making like tool items? So there's like a base level, and then there's like a star level on top of that.
Right. Star level gets complicated, and the formula keeps being updated because it might not always be working as intended through Hootie and other devs. So it's always being tweaked. Essentially, what the star level is supposed to be is uh, based on the average range between what your worst item is and what the best item will actually be that you can make. Your higher mastery will actually determine what the minimum star level should be, and your maximum will basically just determine how good that star level should actually be for stats. Kind of like a multiplier,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere between the minimum stat line and the maximum. Um, when you're actually combining two different components together, you'll actually make one component that's tier 7, another one that's tier 9, and overall the two items together equal tier 16. And then each one of those components would have been made with stats based off of the masteries of who made them, and when combined, their overall stars should actually be those combined. Uh, and the math gets weird from there, but it takes a lot of practice from all parts in crafting to really get the entirety of that. We might make an entire episode, just a short one, based off of just that,
Mm-hmm.
when enough changes have happened to where we can stabilize it and say, this is this nailed down. But I don't want to get too much further into that.
Sure. So differences between gathering and in crafting. I know some have dice rolls, some have like a 50% base that's modified, and then how does mastery alter those two different systems?
Yeah, success used to work differently before the beta. Uh, in the beta, I believe, was the start of when dice rolls were used, or maybe just a little bit beforehand. The old system for successes are still used for refined material crafting uh, and cooking and alchemy. But pretty much everything else has been transitioned over to the dice system. So I'll go one at a time explaining how those systems work. Uh, in the old system, everything started at 50% for a normal tier item. And if you were to cook, for example, seared salmon requires one salmon and two logs. If you used an elder, which is the second tier of item after normal, and a normal thing of logs, you would actually take a -5% to your success because elder is -10, and then average out with the logs, which is normal zero average. If you're to use elder on both, it would actually be -10 overall for your success. Can get kind of complicated when you're mixing stuff together, which I think is why everything's being moved to the dice system.
Hmm.
Um, but the way that mastery goes into that is that it's that 50% plus 3% success rate per tier or per mastery. So if you got up to 8 mastery, that's going to be 1 plus the 7. So it's going to be plus 21%. If you're doing normal tier crafting, it's going to be 71%. And then take 10% off of that for every single tier of average that you're using with all of the ingredients you're using. Uh, Dice is making things a little bit simpler, but it's still odd because it uses dice weighting. I don't mind it because I know that Hootie isn't planning on using that dice weighting for the benefit of all the buffs that are going to happen to dice rolls later on.
Hmm.
Um, but specifically, like I said, everything but refined material crafting and cooking and alchemy are on the dice system now. Your successes now actually happen based off of dice rolls. 2d6 is the term for that, or two six-sided die at Mastery 1, in which, because of dice weighting, instead of the average of 3.5, which you would find on normal dice, it's actually 3.28 because stuff is actually weighted towards the bottom results, or rather away from rolling a 6. So you can actually imagine that your average roll on 2d6 is about 6.5, 6.6. And the difficulty, as I would say, is 5 for normal. You're going to be finding that in parentheses around stuff that you're trying to gather. Like when you're a forester, you'll see spruce 5. And so you need to roll over a 5 to be able to collect one item. And if you actually roll a 10 or above, you'll actually get 2 of that item. So it actually allows you to do multiples, which is really neat for increasing the amount of output you have as a gatherer. Now, every single mastery that you get is going to have an effect on your success rates in one way or another. It's been made where every even number of mastery you get is going to be giving you a +1 to your dice result. So Mastery 2 is going to give you 2d6 plus 1. Every 3 levels that you get is going to give you an extra die. So it's going to give you 3d6 at Mastery 3, and that'll come out to a result of 3.28 times 3 overall, so you can calculate your averages. Then we actually recently had an addition as well that makes it so primes, like your level 5, your level 7, your level 11, 13, 17, everything like that, is going to actually have additional effects. Now, you might be able to tell me if I'm wrong because I haven't paid attention to this recently, but level 5 is -1 difficulty?
I believe so.
Yeah, and 7, I believe, is you get +1 of that item.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a little. It's a little bit ad hoc, and there's some cases where I mean, in theory, it's not necessarily the prime numbers. It's just that's how they work out. So I think if you were to expand this out to like, if there was a mastery level 25, that would be lumped into these prime numbers, but it's not actually a prime.
Yeah,
Um,
with the mastery limit being 20, I think it applies to them being primes as
yeah,
far
it,
as the
it
examples go.
it correlates.
But
Yeah.
yeah, if there's ever expansions to the game that push it beyond 20, obviously it would be a moot topic to call them primes. But
Hmm.
for now, it's a fitting moniker. Um, and so, pretty much the higher up in mastery you get in the dice system, for gathering at least, the higher your output will be. You can sometimes get 3, 4, 5. At nearing mastery 10, where some people have reached so far, they're getting 10 or 11. Yeah, this guy over here is insane with pine. He can clear entire forests in a day. Um, so That's kind of where the dice system is for gathering. For crafting, it gets a little bit more difficult because since not all crafts have been converted over, they haven't determined bonuses for all of them. Most of the uh, most of the crafts that actually do use it, the mastery doesn't do much for them other than, like it stated above, with the end product crafting. It'll influence the maximums that their stuff actually gets. The individual masteries, like sub masteries for like iron pickheads, will determine the minimums that they roll. But once everything gets converted over, a lot of these passives, like from the primes I was mentioning, are going to be converted over to crafting, making a lot of quality of life and a lot of output changes. So we may actually make a follow up episode to this that will specifically list those changes and how everything is different for crafters.
Yeah, and output changes seem like they would be a huge benefit to those refined material crafters.
Yeah,
Um, I mean,
me
yeah, right. They
making
can,
one fish per tick while some guy's getting 8 logs per second. So,
and really the only thing you can do is drop it to where you're consuming 0 fish per tick to actually make your cooked fish. Um, so
that crafting equipment is not actually affecting me as much as a lot of other people. So I'm wondering if the dice system is actually what makes that 100% actually work. We'll see how that is in the future. But
so one of the to go along with this, we've been talking about mastery levels as well as quality of materials. Um, for a gatherer, one of the guidelines I've been going with is if once you hit mastery 6, it becomes worth your while to start gathering elder, and once you hit mastery 9, then it becomes worth your while to start gathering rare materials. Before
mhm.
that, you're not close to 100%. But once you get to that M6 for Elder, M9 for Rare, you get within a point or two of being at 100%, and your gear can push you there. Um, Now, with with that in mind, how does it make as much of a difference for those refined material crafters to get that Mastery 6 or Mastery 9? Because from what I can tell, it doesn't correlate as strongly.
No. Getting only plus 3% per mastery for a refined materials crafter or a cook or alchemist does not make nearly as much of a difference. It does help a little bit because we don't suffer nearly as much at higher tiers as other crafters may. But a lot of the end product crafters don't have to they deal a lot better with making 500 or something because they're used to it and only getting a few of a really high rarity of something because they usually the stats will actually pay off well enough.
Hmm.
But if you just fail to make what your job is to be able to get that to an end product crafter, you aren't making anything. So if I just made like 2 food every hour because I'm trying to make an ascendant, just because I'm technically possible of doing it, I'm not being a worthwhile cook. So that is the difference, and hopefully the dice system will help out with that, along with all the other bonuses that jump in.
Yeah, and I think it's worth it to say though that if you're not working within the dice system, it's still worth your while to go ahead and craft those things that you can craft with a reasonable success rate. Because if you're selling to the market, um, you're going to get paid the difference. If you're working within a guild, it's going to be absolutely necessary to have those resources. So if you're on the outside looking in and saying, maybe I don't want to do that if I'm failing 50% of the time, give or take, well, just keep in mind that a refined material might be selling on the market for 10 times uh, the unrefined material. And
Mhm.
you're not going to use 10 of those unrefined materials to make the one. It might be close, but you're still going to come out with a profit margin.
Yeah. I kind of want to explain the multiplication between what a gatherer and what a crafter, a refined material crafter, actually deal with as far as the costs in the market. This is actually an excerpt from the very start of the game when the server launched. I had developed a pricing system for exactly how things were going, and I set the market price for a good 3 hours before stuff started to actually accelerate. um, I was accepting materials, logs, and fish for 1 leal each. And I actually needed to post my cooked seared salmon for 8. And people are asking me like, how are you getting 8 times the cost when you're receiving only 3 materials? Well, I only have a 50% chance to succeed, and I need to make a small profit to increase my throughput. So that's actually how that goes. So if you see ore on the market for like 50 each, because that ore is just so high level that almost no one can get it, but you can then smelt it, look at that price, 50. You can actually probably make those bars and sell them back on the market for 4 or 500 because like there's someone that's going to be able to use them.
Hmm.
But if there's hardly anyone that can actually smelt them, then you can actually demand a lot. So supply and demand is really big. This market is evolving at all times. Anytime new stuff gets added to the game, you're going to be able to jump in there.
Yeah, and we could look at values today, and they could be different in a week. We've got new materials hitting the market, new quality of materials hitting the market, not to mention inflation. I've seen logs go from 1 leol, you know, around launch, and people were saying 3 is ridiculous. And now there's people buying, I think I saw today rare ebony for 36, and I've
Yeah.
even sold some logs upwards of 40. So they're there and people want them because not only can they turn around and make a profit off of what they make from it, but they're also gathering experience and mastery in what they're doing. So maybe that transitions right into uh, what should you, as a person, what should you decide to do? Um, are you someone who's already playing and pretty locked into what you're doing? Are you someone who's playing and maybe bored with what you're doing? Or, you know, you just want to mix it up a little bit? You want to be self-sustaining? Uh, are you looking to work within a guild? Are you coming in fresh? Are you watching this video and never even really heard of Talibri? And are maybe thinking, what do I want to do? Insights?
Yeah, there's actually a few things that even I, as more of like a meta game, someone that likes to just play the system, would do. If you're actually one of those elite gamers that thinks this game has already started, I'm not going to be able to jump in and actually be somewhere on the market. Well, there's not only just like the new stuff like player housing that's coming out that uses the construction profession that no one has right now. There's actually stuff in the game that people don't focus on at all right now. Specifically, arrows is a really low demand market right now. But when the combat reworks happen, when the ranger affinity gets used more, perhaps when there's actually prestige affinities, which have been hinted at in the future, all this priority on who's playing a ranger might change, and then suddenly everyone might want to play ranger. It might be useful to gain levels on that whenever, and so arrows are going to be really big. Well, right now they're not really. One of the things you can do to step in, even in the current professions, is everyone's trying to master something at the lower levels because the sooner you have access to it, the sooner you can actually say, I'm ahead of everyone else. I'm going to actually master this and be the highest. And so my stuff is always going to be the best output and the highest stats. Well, if you power level up to the top and find ways to market everything to be able to get up to the top, there may be stuff that no one actually has reached for or no one has actually prioritized yet that they've had access to long enough that you can be that first person, the pioneer in that market. There's not enough players right now in Talibri, but we're trying to change that, obviously, to be able to actually fulfill that market on every avenue.
Yeah, perfect point of that is the rare ebony that I mentioned before. It's selling for 36 leol. The people have buy orders for 36 leol in the market right now, and nobody's filling them because it's one of those logs that you just jump right over.
Mhm.
It's like boom, boom, boom. You hit mastery 4, and the next one's unlocked. What is it? Witchwood, or I don't know, whatever one's next. So people just skip right over it. It's like the flyover log. There's a couple of them that are like that, and so it might be worth rethinking. Hey, maybe power leveling isn't the best. Maybe mastery and gathering is more of what you want to focus on. That might
Yeah.
reap the most short-term rewards. And then as soon as I say that, someone's going to jump in, do it, and you know something else is going to open up. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I can. One of the most in-demand woods right now is spruce. That's the first tier, and it's just everybody's moved off of spruce. So some people are sitting there camping and making a killing off of it.
Yeah, everything has a weird range like that because you're going to get a lot more higher experience in forestry by trying to get those higher end logs. But guess what? If suddenly it's not in high demand for foresters to get the lower end logs, and it's in really high demand for there to be woodworkers to join your guild to actually make a whole bunch of player housing for you, they're going to want to be able to switch a lot of people over that are only level 1 woodworkers. They can't process the higher end logs.
Hmm.
So they're going to need spruce in huge amounts. And so they're going to want to actually try to get that market to be flooded with spruce. But if there's no one doing it, you can actually demand a lot of money for it.
Yeah,
And if Leal's in high supply because it's an entire guild funding it, you can jump into the game on day one, get all that spruce, and just make a killing. So you are not behind. If you want to just stare at the market all day and just gather whatever it is that people need, you're set.
yeah. Because if you're coming in and supplying, level one logs, there's going to be someone opposite you in another part of the country or part of the world who's jumping in at level one woodworking and needs those level one logs. And the 99% of people who have already moved off of them, they're not going to jump back to supply them. They're looking
Hmm.
for the level, they're looking for the leaderboard. So there's a huge opening or opportunity for everything at every level.
Yeah, one of the biggest opportunity costs that actually lets you make money in this game is the fact that everyone wants to level at once. There has been no really balanced system where everyone is, getting everything they need and then crafting from it. Everyone is trying to buy stuff from someone else to make the best use of their time in crafting it, or gathering stuff so that they're always the best at gathering. Uh, and so there's always going to be stuff that people refuse to get for somebody else because they're working only with specific people. They're going to lose their customers and they're going to be like, I have to switch to something else. But it's
Hmm.
going to be really painful because they've only done one thing. If you are either one player or the other, you're going to be able to have a customer or not. And that's going to be really high risk, high reward. Or if you just switch doing everything at once, doing gathering and crafting for anybody that needs it, you're probably going to balance out to getting the same amount of money, the same amount of market share.
Yeah, jack of all trades, master of one. Take your pick.
Hmm.
And going back to what we were talking about before with new players coming in, don't feel bad. Don't feel like you've got to catch up. New systems and mechanics are being added all the time, whereby you as a person can catch up. You have a
Hmm.
much more accelerated role in all this. When we launched day one, we didn't have a gathering armor, and then we went 10%, and then 20% armor, and this is all chances to make plus one item, 30% armor, 40%. Those are things that are going to help you boost your production. Um,
Hmm.
the tools nowadays, they're getting better, and you can actually increase the rate at which you gain mastery by the stats on the tools. I use an axe that's plus one uh, mastery points when it procs, and that's awesome. If we get that over 10%, that's huge progression that someone has uh, trying to catch up to the people who are already out there. And
Hmm.
Hoodie's talked about having a 9 month window right now for people to hit. Was it Mastery 20?
I
Uh,
believe so. Yeah, just one thing, not
yeah, one
everything, just
thing.
one thing.
9 months. It's going to take me 9 months to hit Mastery 20 on Pine. Uh, Further down the road, his goal is 3 months. So that's a huge amount of acceleration, and we're not even close to that right now. They're going to be
Yeah,
player housing. I think is going to help that. Guild housing, the bonuses that you can have off of those, uh, the increases
world
in
events.
tools, world
Yeah,
events.
yeah.
So don't feel bad. Don't feel like you got to catch up. Just take it at your own pace and see what's on the market. And those tools and that gear, that's becoming increasingly more economical because there's someone like me who started day one that sees that gear as almost useless and just dumps it right back onto the market for
Mhm.
much less than what we bought it for.
Yeah, this is getting a bit off topic with the combat, but I actually recently saw someone that had just started combat, wanted to try the game out, and said, "I'm in zone one. I'm able to stably play, but it's probably going to take me a while. But I want to catch up. So what do I do?" And so he said, "I want to try reaching out and seeing. if so anyone's willing to help me, I'm willing to actually just give all this money that I have to somebody else and see, can I pay you back if I get some gear now? And I actually organized for someone to hand him gear that was like a just like hand me downs from one of our combatants that I know,
Hmm.
and he immediately jumped from zone 1 up to zone 4 and was at zone 5 at day 2.
Yeah.
So if you want to jump in the game right now, it's not hard for someone to do that equivalent thing for you in gathering and crafting. You can obviously find someone that says, I will do all this stuff for you if you just gather for me for a couple of days up to a week. And then after that, you're going to have the mastery from doing all that, all the supplies you need to do it well, and enough knowledge to be able to progress through the game in that profession, or just switch completely and do whatever you need to, as long as the gear actually says you can do it just fine. Or the money that you actually get from doing it in the first place means you can actually buy whatever you want and choose whatever adventure you want.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah, you're not stuck anywhere.
jumping in with a guild is a great way to get involved and have that support system built up around you. That's a great way to get up on the leaderboard, start moving up mastery. Um, but there are some people who might just want to be self-sufficient, and that's cool too.
Yeah.
There's tons of people out there. There's a vibrant Discord community. There's an in-game chat where people are like really helpful. There's not a whole lot of toxicity in the community, at least from where I can see it. And if you're looking for some help, just reach out. We've got community MVPs who are more than happy to help in the Discord. Tons of people who have leftover gear. I've got probably 5 sets of gear still in my inventory I haven't done anything with. So, you know, we've probably beat this one to death a little bit, but don't feel like you're too far behind to get started now.
Yeah, and a little bit of hype, but a little bit of bursting a bubble. Official guilds are not actually something that exists as of this recording right now. Yeah, boohoo, but really, like, it's going to be like a month and a half, and I think that that code is going to be getting completed. And that is mostly going to be a logistics thing. But if you actually reach out in the Discord, there is not only another Discord that's for just like guild recruitment, but there's also a lot of people that will just want you being in association with their guild because they'll find work for you to do and they'll reward you. But right now, guilds are mostly just associations of people that hang out on the same Discord and
Hmm.
work together through the market.
Yeah,
But
they're
systems will
communities.
actually be developed. Yeah, they're sub communities under this game, and really it's just a whole bunch of people working together. But when guilds release, and obviously we're going to be getting another interview with the devs on that because that and combat and the consumables rework, they're super excited to share that with us, and we'll see them back again. But we'll get a lot more details on how that actually works out for you as a gatherer or crafter, which that's going to be super important. They actually added a button pretty close after the launch of beta that actually allows you to kill your session. That is used for two different things, either for making sure that when you're logged off, you're counted as logged off, and also for if you actually play at home and then you want to kill your session, so when you pull it up at work, your other actions aren't actually trying to conflict with your current ones. That's what that's for.
That's 100% me right there.
Yeah. So this has actually been episode 1 of Talibri Town Crier, all about gathering and crafting. Leave some comments in the YouTube video down below on any questions that you actually have for the future, and we'll actually try to include those in our future videos on that related topic. Thank you for listening.
If there's anything that we've mentioned in today's podcast, any resources, links to the game, the Discord servers we've mentioned, the Trello server, the Reddit, we will make sure to put that in the description of the video as well. So this is Stretch.
And I've been Devon. Have a nice day.